There's no shortage of buzz around artificial intelligence today and how it's going to change everything. Our jobs, transportation, sex lives, and yes, educational system too. Our speaker today will spell out some of the disruptions coming our way, especially as related to education. Dr. Tom Reeves is a good friend and colleague who I've had the pleasure of knowing for over 3 decades. Tom is Professor Emeritus of Learning, Design, and Technology at the University of Georgia. He was a Fulbright lecturer in Peru and has given invited presentations all over this country and in over 30 countries. He's the author of 4 books and scores of articles and monographs, and consults frequently for the World Health Organization and many other important organizations in academia, government, and business. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Dr. Tom Reeves.
Well, we've got multiple technologies going here, and anytime you use technology, it's like a wild animal act. It may pee on the stage at any moment. But we have a lot of experts in the room that can help us sort that sort of thing out. And if you could bring up my first slide, I appreciate that. And Gary, thank you for that generous introduction. As Gary said, we've known each other for almost 35 years, and he's frankly one of the best people on the planet. And he's here with his colleague, Hill Jason, another fantastic person. I've had the opportunity to work with them in various medical education enterprises over the years. I'm also very pleased that my wife, Tricia Reeves, is here. As Gary mentioned, she also is a professor at the University of Georgia. And a special guest, Yael Kali from the University of Haifa in Israel. A couple days ago, I was communicating with a colleague in the Netherlands. We just got the galley proofs for a book that we've written about design-based research. And I happened to mention to her that I was going to be in Boulder, and she said, "Oh, Yael's in Boulder," and so she connected us. So that just shows the modern world today, where you can be connected with anyone at any time. So today's talk, and I'm so glad to see, by the way, a lot of young people here, because I really love to get your reaction to this as well. Today's talk is called Human Learning and Machine Learning, Amplification or Annihilation. I think I've meant to have a question mark there. But, today, machine learning is progressing at an amazing progress rate, and all kinds of things are being automated, and in many cases, jobs are being eliminated. Now, most of you, I get a sense in this room, are professionals of some sort or another, and you may scoff at the idea that machine learning or robots or some sort of technology could replace you or people in your field. Perhaps at the end of this talk, I will have planted a little seed of doubt about that. Just 1 second here. Okay, so take a look at this slide. Now, one of those is a robot, and one of those is a human being. One's a humanoid woman, and the other's a human woman. Now, it's easy to tell which is which because of the wires that are exposed in the one on the left, but would you be able to tell if you just saw this without that exposure? These are the products of Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro. I knew I'm messing that name up, from Osaka University's robotics laboratory. And his goal is to build more humanoid robots that are more and more lifelike. And you may have heard of his work. It's been featured in lots of TED Talks and those sorts of things. This is Erica. Erica is his latest creation. And Erica, they promised by 2020, that's just 2 years from now, that Erica will be able to express 6 core human emotions. The ability to express happiness, sadness, be afraid, be surprised, be angry, and be disgusted. So as you might not be too surprised, this has drawn the attention of both the scientific communities and the business and industry communities as well. And so he's been featured on lots of magazine covers around the world. Now, magazine covers about robots have been around for a long time. I was born in 1947, and in the 1950s, I suspect some of you remember this as well. There were two kinds of images of robots that were put out there for us. One was this notion of robots as these helpful, wonderful creatures that were going to relieve us of the onerous daily work. And here we see a couple of robots from a popular electronics magazine of that age, helping put up the Christmas tree. I don't know about you, but I would buy these robots in a second. There's nothing I hate worse than putting up a Christmas tree. The other image that we saw in the 1950s was fearful images of movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still, or robots that were threatening and were going to take over the planet and so forth. Now, I like to use Time magazine as a way of indicating how we've made progress in different fields. So this is a 1950 cover of Time magazine, and they were talking about the Mark III computer that Harvard University had developed for the US Navy at that time. And the story was talking about whether or not computers, and again, this is 1950, computers would ever match humans in intelligence. So they were already speculating about that way back then. You can see the quote here: "Machines with superhuman brains are still a little frightening. The men who design them try to deny that they are creating their own intellectual competitors." And as we'll see in a bit, we may be failing at those efforts after all these years. So march ahead 30 years, 1980, robots were once again on the cover of Time magazine. In this case, they were talking about the robots on assembly lines, which of course now are ubiquitous. I saw a headline just this morning: there are now more robots on assembly lines in China than in any other country. So they've really adopted into this technology quite a bit. But it talked about the robot revolution in 1980, and here again, they were trying to maybe belay some of our fears. So they said, for good or ill, robots are already transforming the way the world works. The new robots do not look like Frankenstein's monster or like R2-D2 in Star Wars, but rather like a row of giant birds. And if you've seen these films of these assembly lines, you certainly are familiar with that image. March ahead another 35 years, and we have the 2015 edition of Time magazine that was focused on the singularity. And the singularity is the time when computer scientists and others speculate that machine learning, machine intelligence, artificial intelligence will match or exceed human intelligence. And so the story said, we're approaching a moment when computers will become intelligent, and not just intelligent, but more intelligent than humans. When that happens, humanity, our bodies, our minds, our civilization will be completely and irreversibly transformed. Computer scientists predict this will happen around 2045. Now, books are being written about the singularity, and there are two types of books. Some are very utopian, and some are dystopian. Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near, is very popular, and it has a very utopian view of these developments. And he predicts that once we do merge our intelligence with machine intelligence, that we will reach some sort of immortality. And he makes a pretty interesting case for that. But there are also lots of books that present dystopian views. And so we have Our Final Invention by James Barrick, Artificial Intelligence and the End of the Human Era. And these types of books speculate that once these systems become more intelligent than us, they'll begin to question, do we really need those humans anymore? And they might just decide to eliminate us, maybe keep a few as pets or in zoos, that sort of thing. But so these dystopian and utopian views are out there. Now, it is amazing with respect to robots how far we've come in a short time. This is Shaky. Shaky was a robot developed at Stanford University in 1970, and it was the first robot that actually was aware of its surroundings and could make decisions based on its own sensors, as opposed to being programmed step by step to do things. March ahead to today, and here we have Nadine. Nadine is a receptionist at Nanyang Technological University. She remembers people she's met before. She greets you. She'll say, you know, how's your family doing? How's the weather back in Boulder? Whatever might be relevant. And they say that she can express empathy in terms of you being sad or happy. So we've really rapidly developed quite a bit. And so today we're at a point where we're getting to the development of humanoids that you can't actually distinguish from real humans. What I'd like you to do for just a second is just lean to the left or right and see if you hear any soft whirling sounds coming from the person next to you. You know, you just never know. You never know. So where's all this leading? The New Yorker last October had a cover story about this. And in their cover story, they featured this image of a homeless man sitting on a sidewalk, and a robot is throwing a few gears into his cup. And you see the homeless man's dog looking rather doubtfully at the robotic dog. And so, frankly, robot dogs worry me just about more than anything. The first robot dog, Aobo, was released by Sony 20 years ago, but it wasn't very successful, and they eventually stopped making them. It just was too clunky and not very dog-like. But just last Christmas, they introduced a new version of Aobo. For only $1,700, you can get Aobo, and you pay $26 a month maintenance fee, and Aobo can actually get to know you. And Aobo's intelligence is linked in with the intelligence of other robot dogs all over the world. And so as you download the monthly information, your dog becomes smarter and smarter. And it learns to come and greet you, and it knows how you like to pet it, and so forth. So this technology is really worrisome, particularly for our dogs. This is Button and Zipper. These are our two West Highland Terriers who are home in Athens with a dog sitter, and they're always concerned that we might get a cat. They don't know that there's a possibility we might get a robot dog. Now, what about humanoid love partners? The BBC had a special program last year called Could You Love a Robot? And speculated on this. And there's been quite a lot of press about this. And books, again, have been written about this. And these are not tabloid-type books. These are from MIT Press and other types of things. Love and Sex with Robots, Robot Sex, Social and Ethical Implications. So people are seriously speculating about this possibility. My wife is here, and I know she would never get a robot dog. But on the other hand, there are times when, I don't know. So let's get back to the topic of this talk, learning. I've actually been involved in learning research since 1966. I'm pictured here from a story in the LaGrange Daily News, LaGrange, Georgia, in April of 1966. That's me in the center. And I'm placing a rat in a 3-stage rocket And my colleague and I had trained this experimental rat to run a maze, and we had a control rat named, the rats were named Julia and Susan, who just happened to be the names of the top cheerleaders at the school. And so we blasted Julia off, and she returned safely to Earth. And then we put her in the maze, and what we found was every study I've ever done since then, the same thing, no significant differerences, which is the story of research in education, unfortunately. This interesting thing about this picture, there's only 2 of us that were doing this science work in the picture, and we both have glasses. Everyone else is a jock, an athlete at the high school, and they all wanted to get in on the story. So they're there holding rockets and so forth, acting like they're part of this, but they weren't. But, you know, I had to include them in the picture or they beat me up, but I was a nerd. So actually 10 years before my graduation from high school, in 1956, the first conference on artificial intelligence was held at Dartmouth College. And this is John McCarthy, professor there, who coined the term artificial intelligence. And in the early days of this work, they actually were trying to mimic human intelligence. So one of their goals was to program into AI systems enough moves so that a computer could beat a human at chess. And they weren't successful. For decades, they were not successful. And they weren't successful because they were trying to mimic human intelligence. March ahead until today's age, and computer scientists no longer try to mimic human intelligence. Instead, what they've done is using powerful computers and advances in software, they actually enable the computers to teach themselves. And so the big blue computer that beat Garry Kasparov, the then chess champion in 1997, what was actually, it taught itself to play chess. It played millions and millions and millions of games and learned to be a chess master. And that's how deep learning works. It actually teaches itself. And so the capacity of these technologies to see and understand, to think and to express itself, to listen and speak and so forth is advancing at amazing rates. And some have predicted that this is going to lead to a serious reduction in human employment. A study at Oxford University in the UK predicted that 37% of all jobs in the UK would be eliminated within the next few years by these technologies. Now, it's not just people on assembly lines that are threatened by these developments. This is a very interesting book. I recommend to you, The Future of the Professions. These authors are not computer scientists. It's a father and son team. Richard Susskind is one of the leading barristers in the UK. His son is a professor of economics at Oxford. And they speculate that these systems will soon replace physicians and architects and accountants and teachers, by the way, and other professionals. Now, in another book written by a computer scientist, Martin Ford, an entrepreneur, Rise of the Robots, Technology and the Threat of a Jobless Future, he describes numerous examples of how these machine learning technologies are eliminating whole careers. Consider pharmacy. Do we have any pharmacists in the room? I don't see any pharmacists. Okay. Well, one of the examples he gives is at the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco, which sends out 10,000 individual medications a day to patients without a single human being touching a pill or a vial or anything like that. They have a robotic system that everything's barcoded and so forth to match up with the patient, and then they have these robots that go and get from the central dispensary the needed medication, is taken to the bedside of the patient, a nurse barcodes the medicine, barcodes the patient, and they've reduced human error quite a bit in these hospitals that are using these types of systems. Now, it's interesting, on the front of that, I don't know if you can read it, it says, please do not enter elevator with the robot. Wonder what that's all about. The radiology, any radiologists in the room, already studies at Stanford University have shown that machine learning radiologists are better at diagnosing scans and so forth than human radiologists in 12 different medical cases. What about teachers? Well, you know, I've been a professor at the University of Georgia for 25 years, and there's a little technical school in Atlanta called Georgia Tech that we occasionally play in football. Actually, this is a professor at Georgia Tech who teaches, Professor Gaul, he teaches a course in artificial intelligence online that enrolls thousands of students, and he has 12 graduate assistants in this class. And one of them is a machine learning system, and the students are not able to tell the difference between the help they get from the digital assistant and the human assistants. And in fact, he says this fall, he's going to have 4 computer-based graduate assistants and 8 humans. So, you know, the threat is out there for all kinds of professions. And in fact, a recent survey showed that here in the United States, a random sample showed that Americans are more afraid of being replaced in their jobs by these types of robots and systems than they are of romantic rejection or public speaking, which is pretty dramatic. Now, some people say, well, we need to double down on STEM education so that we can prepare our students to compete with these systems. Well, maybe, maybe not. It turns out this is recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and was featured in the New York Times. And it basically says that within STEM, we are producing more degrees than there is demand, dramatically more. Only in computer science does the demand exceed the supply. And in some fields like the life sciences, we have way more people prepared for careers than there are career opportunities. Similarly, in engineering, physical sciences, mathematical sciences. So maybe doubling down on STEM is not such a good thing. STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Now, this was an image that appeared in a story in the Chicago Tribune recently, and it was a story about human assembly line workers being replaced in factories in Wisconsin. And basically, the story was saying that the main rationale, and many of these workers, by the way, they get paid $10.50 an hour, not a lot of money, but they're finding it more economical to replace them with robots because oftentimes their assembly lines don't have a sufficient number of people that show up for work. They said on a typical day, you might need 8 people on this assembly line, only 5 will show up. One's been arrested for using opioid drugs, and 2 just don't show up, they don't know. And they also say they can't find people that can pass drug tests in parts of Wisconsin in order to be employed. And these folks were taking a smoke break. We'll come back to them a little bit later. So where is all this going is certainly an open book. We really don't know for sure. I actually went online and looked for a few headlines that capture, so these are some headlines I found looking at this topic. So one of them was, robots are not as smart as you think. Okay, that's helpful. Another one was, will robots eventually replace humans as the dominant species on Earth? Another one was the case for not worrying about robots. Another was, robots will take more than 500,000 construction jobs by 2040. I don't know if you've seen these videos of these bricklaying machine learning systems. They're phenomenal. And then here is another one. AI could eventually replace humans altogether, Professor Stephen Hawking warns. So the jury's out. A lot of speculation on where all this is going. Now, a hopeful village vision is presented by two MIT professors who wrote a book called The Second Machine Age. And they say there are three core human abilities that won't be able to be replaced by these systems within the foreseeable future. One of them is ideation, and this is the proverbial thinking outside of the box, being creative. Another is broad frame pattern recognition, the ability to take in lots of complex information, political, environmental, social, and recognizing an ill-structured problem and coming up with an original solution to that. The third is complex communication, to be able to try to persuade people using nuance and empathy, that this is a human behavior that these systems won't be able to do. Obviously, though, as I've already said, some people are trying to get these systems to accomplish these various things. So, how many of you people in the audience are currently in education as a student? Okay, a few hands. So, students today, are we preparing you for competition with these evolving systems? It's a good question. We certainly have equipped you with smart devices. You carry them in your pockets, you wear them on your wrist, you go to bed with your iPads or other technology and so forth, and it's ubiquitous. You use it to communicate, social media, everything like that. But what about integrating those into academic work? It really hasn't been very successful. No significant differences unfortunately continues to be the default finding for using technology in education in many cases. And the data on student engagement is really alarming. The national study of student engagement has been going on for almost 20 years. And a typical professors in academic, let's say the University of Colorado, they expect an undergraduate student carrying a full load to be engaged 15 hours a week in class, and then to spend another 2 to 3 hours for every hour in class studying. Now that's not a heavy workload, if you think about it. That's basically around a 45-hour workload for most students. Well, the data from the NESI studies show that only 7% of students match or exceed that amount of studying. And in fact, most studies today show that students study less than an hour for an hour in class. And you can go online and look at all these videos of students bragging, oh, I'm graduating this weekend with my undergraduate degree in business management, and I've got a B+ average, and I never go to class, and I party every night, and so forth. We're just not academically engaging our students very well. And a lot of them are involved, a lot of them have to work jobs in order to pay for an exorbitant cost of higher education. Many of them are hooked on video games. So you may have seen earlier this week, the World Health Organization characterized video game addiction as a serious illness, psychological illness. Now, these are two professors that I've known since the 1970s when I was a graduate student at Syracuse, Ernie Pasquarella and Patrick Terenzini. They are the go-to scholars on how college affects students. And they have ample evidence that the impact of college is largely determined by individual effort and involvement in the academic, interpersonal, and extracurricular offerings on a campus. Now, when we think about learning, we typically think about three domains: the cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor. And for decades, researchers have developed and refined hierarchies of these. The cognitive domain, we often, unfortunately, we teach and test at the lower levels of applying, understanding, and remembering information. We say we value creating, evaluating and analyzing, but we don't really test very well for that. And students aren't stupid. They figure out, if it's not on the test, I'm not going to study it. And so if you're only testing at the remembering level, then why would they work hard? There's an affective domain, a psychomotor domain. These have been organized in the hierarchies as well. But we've ignored an entire domain. And that's the cognitive or the conation domain. How many of you heard the word conation before? I'm not surprised to see not many hands, because I recently spoke to 400 advanced placement high school teachers and saw hardly any hands as well. The cognitive learning domain is all about will, desire, level of effort, drive, striving, mental energy, self-determination, and intention. It's been around for 23 centuries. Aristotle talked about the cognitive learning domain. He actually used a metaphor of a Greek charioteer. He said to be a successful charioteer, you need the cognitive domain, that is the driver, but you need two powerful horses, the affective, the passion, and the cognitive, the follow-through, the drive. And it's been an orphan of psychology for 120 years. German psychologists talked about three fundamental mental states that involve intellectual life: the cognitive, the affective, and the cognitive. Now, if you go into Word and you type in cognitive, it will automatically spell correct it to cognitive. But you go into Amazon, you look for books with the word cognitive in the title, there are very few. But one very popular book was written almost 30 years ago by Kathy Kobe, and it's a business and industry book, and that does a really good job of drawing out the differences between the cognitive, the affective, and the cognitive. It's the difference between knowing, feeling, and acting. We all have aspects of our lives where we have the knowledge about some behavior, and we may even desire to act on that knowledge, but we just don't do it. We don't make that transition to action. It's the difference between thinking, feeling, and willing, knowing, caring, and doing, epistemology, aesthetics, ethics, thought, emotion, volition. You know, I think you could relate these differences to the I'm trying hard to see that. Yes, those, if we could live those four things, a lot of our problems would be eliminated. Now remember, these folks, they're on a smoke break. Probably most of them have the knowledge that smoking is not good for them. And many of them may have the the desire to quit smoking. They just don't have the will, the follow through, the intention to actually do it. And they're literally smoking themselves out of a job. Another popular term for the cognitive learning domain is grit. You may have heard of grit. Angela Duckworth, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, she won one of those MacArthur Genius grants, where they give you $500,000 to do whatever you want with. She says that grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. And she's written a book about this, and I really recommend this to you. She's developed measures of grit. And basically what she argues is that grit, your perseverance and passion for long-term goals, is a better predictor of your success in life than aptitude or intelligence. This variable is not positively related with IQ. So the power of passion and perseverance. So conation is something we have ignored in our schools to our pearl. And we need to do a better job. How do we do that? Well, that's a whole lot of workshops and talks I could do. But one of the keys is we've got to require more of our students. We need to have them more engaged. We can do that through authentic tasks, inquiry-based learning, and other types of pedagogical approaches. We're not doing a very good job of preparing our students to compete with the future that I've pointed out. And you yourselves, you might ask yourself, what development in these what advancement in these two technologies might replace me, might threaten in my future, or my children's future, or my grandchildren's future? Now, I realized I've raised a lot more questions than I've given answers. Voltaire said, judge a man by his questions, not by his answers. So I hope you heed that. But a few years from now, you might be following these developments and think, oh, I remember that Reeves guy came and spoke to the Rotary. And he was like the boy who cried wolf, except he cried robot. And the robots never came. Perhaps. But Voltaire also wrote, everything's fine now. That is our illusion. Thank you.
So Rotary has the last word. There's probably no machine that could get me much further down the road towards brevity as a human, but Rotarian timing is going to produce that effect. So I would like to thank you for a very illuminating talk. I'm a little bit astounded by the congruence between the class Alice and I taught and the things you're saying about student engagement. So I'll speak more about that. We have a fresh, from your honesty, we have a fresh perspective on Christmas trees and our human attitudes towards that, and we appreciate that. But what I think is at the bedrock and so worth contemplating is that the core of your questions drive us to ask, what are human beings? And why do we love them? And why do they drive us mad? And what can we hope for them? So I thank you for that. And as a Rotarian, I am able to thank you for your talk by telling you that the Boulder Rotary Club is pleased to contribute 100 doses of vaccine to the Polio Plus Fund in your name. And I have a nice certificate.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.